For months, Jake Langston and his crew taunted, humiliated, and cornered Celine Carter on that school bus, believing they'd always get away with it. They mistook her silence for weakness, convinced that their lies and privilege made them untouchable. But one morning, they went too far. They tried to force her to the back of the bus, laying hands on her in a final, hateful display of power. What they didn't know was that Celine Carter was a state champion wrestler, and she had been holding back far longer than they ever deserved. When they grabbed her, she fought back, and this time she didn't stop. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments, and make sure to subscribe because what happens next will change everything. Chapter 1. The Morning Silence. The air was still, too still. Celine Carter stood at the curb where Woodmere met Ash, wrapped in her navy blue jacket, the strap of her backpack digging into her shoulder. Her breath fogged the early morning air, and her eyes stayed fixed on the corner. The school bus, old and loud, groaned its way toward her, exhaust trailing like smoke from a tired dragon. It creaked to a stop. The door folded open with a sound that never stopped sounding like a warning. She didn't move right away. She was ready, had been for weeks, but readiness didn't dull the dread. Jake Langston's face was the first she saw through the glass. He sat at the front as usual, eyes already locked on her like a vulture spotting the wounded. Trevor stood behind him, Kyle just to the side. Their eyes lit up the moment they saw her. They were waiting. Celine stepped onto the bus. Her grip on the railing was firm but calm. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The smell of stale sweat and diesel hit her like it did every morning. Mr. Halverson, the driver, barely looked at her. His eyes flicked to the mirror, then forward again, his way of pretending nothing ever happened. She passed the front rows. She could hear the rustling of paper, could already feel the smirks, the breathless anticipation. But her steps were steady. She walked like someone untouchable. It was the only way she knew to survive. She sat in her usual seat, left side, fourth row from the back, a window seat, close enough to escape if she needed to, far enough not to be cornered. The wad of paper hit her shoulder before she even settled in. A light shot, a warning, a reminder. Jake's voice followed right behind. "Careful now, champ," he said, loud enough for the bus to hear. "Wouldn't want to wrinkle that pretty jacket. Might not look so tough then." Laughter rolled down the aisle. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. The rest just stayed quiet. Silence wasn't neutrality, it was permission. Celine didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on the window. The frost gathering at the corners, the blur of houses and trees and pavement. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She had trained her body for competition, her mind for moments like this. This was control, this was power. Mr. Halverson pulled the bus back into motion with a heavy sigh, the engine rumbling underfoot. Tires grinded against cracked asphalt. Outside, the neighborhood passed in shades of gray and brown. Inside, the air thickened. Jake was still watching her. She could feel it crawling over her skin like a threat. His words landed with the same old weight. "Hey, Kyle," he called. "You think Carter remembers how to throw somebody without a medal in her hand?" Another round of laughter. Kyle tossed a gum wrapper that skidded near her foot. "She probably needs a refresher," Trevor added. "Bet she couldn't even pin a scarecrow without a referee watching." Celine didn't move. Her hands stayed loose in her lap. Her eyes never left the window, but she heard it all, felt it all. Jake leaned forward in his seat, voice lowering to something more bitter. "Girl like you should know better than to sit up front." There it was, the line he always towed, the quiet, coded venom that said, "This isn't your space. You don't belong here." Celine turned her head slowly. For the first time, she looked directly at him. "The only thing I don't belong to," she said, voice low, steady, and sharp as ice, "is you." And with that, the entire bus went still. just for a moment. The war had always been there, but now it had a spark. Chapter 2. Their rules. Jake Langston's smirk twitched just slightly at the edges. He leaned back in his seat like her words hadn't touched him, like they hadn't landed with the weight of a thrown punch. But Celine saw the way his fingers tapped harder against the seat, the flicker in his eyes, the shift in his jaw. He didn't expect her to talk back. Not like that. Not so calm, not so clear. Trevor made a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. "She thinks she's tough," he muttered. "Just 'cause she can flip some girls on a mat." Jake cut in louder, snapping the rhythm back into their cruelty. "Nah, she thinks that gold medal makes her better than the rest of us." Another wave of thin laughter rippled down the aisle, weaker than before. A few turned their heads toward the window. A few just looked down, but still, no one spoke up. Kyle, always a step behind, crumpled another wrapper and tossed it into the aisle. "You talk big, Carter," he said, "but you're just another noise we can shut up." Celine breathed through it, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her father had taught her that. "Let them bark," he used to say. "Dogs can't touch you if you don't open the gate." But the gate was getting weaker, one morning at a time. She looked out the window again, her reflection faint in the glass. Wide eyes, steady breath, a face that gave them nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Still, even the best strategies wear thin. Behind her, Jake was fuming in his own quiet way. When words didn't bite, he went for the theater. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled magazine page, an old article from the state championships. Her photo smiled back from it, mid-pose, one arm raised in victory. She remembered that moment, the weight of the medal, the rush in her chest, the applause. Jake held the page up like a trophy. "Hey, everyone," he called, waving it like a flag. "It's our very own celebrity. Think she signs autographs?" He tore it in half, then again and again, letting the scraps fall like snow. "Guess not." Celine didn't move, didn't blink. But something cracked quietly in her chest. She had bled for that moment, trained in silence, bruised in shadows, fought through doubt and sweat and failure for that title. And here they were, reducing it to paper dust in the aisle of a school bus. Her fingers curled slightly against her jeans, not enough to be seen, just enough to feel the edge of anger rising. But still, she didn't rise. Not yet. Jake picked up his water bottle, dented and half empty, and flicked it across the aisle. It bumped against her bag and rolled under her seat. "Since you're feeling bold," he sneered, "do something useful." A few chuckles followed, but they were losing momentum. Celine stared at the bottle, then back at the window. Then, with perfect clarity, she answered, "Pick it up yourself." The words dropped into the space like a challenge, not loud, not forced, just real, clean, sharp. Jake froze for a second, just a flicker, just enough. Then Trevor leaned into the aisle. "You think you're better than us, Carter? You think that medal makes you untouchable?" She turned her head slightly, not even looking at him fully. "No," she said, "but it means I earned my place. Did you?" For a beat, the bus went quiet. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again. The engine hummed beneath their feet. Mr. Halverson stared ahead, pretending the road demanded his full attention. But Celine saw the tight grip on the steering wheel. He heard. He always heard. He just never did a damn thing. Jake's pride boiled over. "You're dead for this," he muttered low, venom in his voice. Celine didn't even blink. "You've been dead," she said, "since you thought you could put your hands on me." The words echoed, and this time, no one laughed. Chapter 3. The Line. They crossed. The silence that followed Celine's words wasn't empty. It pulsed, like the stillness before thunder, like a fuse already lit. Jake Langston stared at her, unmoving. His face twisted, not in confusion, but in disbelief. No one spoke to him like that. Not here, not ever. Celine's calm was more dangerous than shouting could have been, and he knew it. That's what made him furious. Trevor, already twitchy with embarrassment, leaned forward again. "She needs to be taught a lesson," he said, louder this time, hoping the force of his voice would cover the crack in his pride. Kyle, eyes shifting nervously between them, added, "You're going to end up in the back where you belong, Carter." Then he reached out. Foolish. Greedy. Desperate for control. His fingers curled around the strap of her backpack. Celine's eyes narrowed. "That's your mistake," she said, her voice like frost. Trevor moved next, pushing into the aisle as Kyle tugged harder. But they'd already crossed the line. The moment they laid hands on her, Celine Carter was no longer holding back. She exploded upward. Her left hand gripped Kyle's wrist, twisting it in one sharp motion that made his knees buckle. He gasped, trying to pull away, but she used his momentum against him, turning her body in perfect form. His foot caught on the seat frame, and he went down hard, landing with a hollow thud that made the bus lurch with sound. Trevor lunged, but Celine was faster. She pivoted, grabbed his hoodie by the chest, and used his own weight to drive him backward. He slammed into the seat behind him, knocking his head into the vinyl with a grunt. Before he could recover, she hooked her leg behind his and dropped him in one clean, brutal motion. His breath left him in a single shocked exhale. Gasps echoed across the bus. No more laughing, no more comments. Just the sharp electricity of too late. Jake shot up from his seat, face red with disbelief. "Get her!" he shouted. "Don't just lie there!" But Trevor was still on the floor, stunned and gasping. Kyle sat slumped beside him, holding his wrist like it might shatter. Jake stepped into the aisle. No backup now. His voice trembled, just barely. "You think you're tough, huh?" Celine turned to him, slowly, deliberately, her shoulders squared, her feet planted, her voice steel. "You want to find out?" Jake hesitated. Just long enough. That was all she needed. She didn't move toward him. She didn't need to. Her stillness was louder than any attack. Then Jake made the mistake. He lunged, too wide, too slow. Celine slipped to the side, grabbed his elbow, and yanked him off balance. He stumbled, barely catching himself before crashing into the seat across the aisle. The bus shook. Mr. Halverson finally shouted, voice trembling, "Enough! That's enough!" He slammed the brakes. The bus skidded to the curb with a screech. Everyone jerked in their seats as momentum snapped forward. The bus came to a hard stop. Breathing, silence, scattered sounds of shock. Then Halverson stood, tall, pale, hands clenched on the seat rail. "What the hell is going on back here?" he demanded. Jake, still reeling, pointed at Celine. "She attacked us! She's crazy!" Kyle, still holding his arm, chimed in weakly. "Yeah, we didn't do anything." Celine didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked Halverson in the eye and said, "They touched me first. They always do." And then she sat back down, calm, composed, unshaken. The bus driver said nothing, because he knew. And now so did everyone else. Chapter 4. After the storm. The bus rolled forward in stunned silence. No more laughter, no whispers, no gum wrappers sailing through the air, just the hum of the engine, the faint clatter of something rolling beneath a seat, and a tension so thick it felt like the whole vehicle was wrapped in wire. Jake sat hunched in his seat, face flushed, eyes narrowed. Trevor leaned against the wall, chest rising unevenly, trying to look composed while still catching his breath. Kyle clutched his wrist with one hand and his pride with the other. Celine sat still, completely still. Not a single muscle flinched. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed out the window, like the town passing by was the only thing she cared about. But inside, everything was loud. Her heart pounded like a drum. Her throat felt dry. Her pulse raced beneath her skin. Not from fear, not anymore, but from release. like something long locked inside had finally broken free. And once it did, there was no putting it back. She wasn't proud of what happened, but she wasn't sorry either. She had held the line for months, kept her head down, focused on her goals, ignored the taunts, the comments, the notes left in her locker. She had endured their stares, their smirks, their games, all of it. But this morning, they made a choice. They put their hands on her, and she chose to stop being silent. The bus pulled into the school lot with a long, hissing sigh. The brakes exhaled like the bus itself was relieved to be done with the weight it had carried. Still, no one moved. The students sat stiffly in their seats, like something invisible pinned them down. Celine stood first, not in defiance, not in drama, but with the quiet certainty of someone who was no longer afraid. Jake watched her go with clenched teeth and wide eyes. He didn't speak, didn't move. His hands balled into fists, but he didn't rise. Not yet. Trevor looked away. Kyle kept his head down. Mr. Halverson gave a half-hearted nod toward the door. "Principal wants to see you," he said quietly, his voice shaky. "All of you." Of course, she thought. They'd find a way to flip this. They always did. As Celine stepped off the bus, the morning air hit her like a wave, cool and damp, thick with the scent of asphalt and pine. But the silence behind her felt louder than anything, the weight of 100 unspoken thoughts pressing against her back. She walked toward the front office with her head held high, each step sharp and measured. The students who passed her in the parking lot gave her sideways glances, some curious, some fearful. No one said a word. Inside the office, the secretary barely looked up. "Principal Thompson will see you in a moment," she said flatly, already picking up the phone. Jake, Trevor, and Kyle came in a moment later, moving like they were stepping into court, not school. All three tried to act unbothered. Only Jake managed to fake it. They were called in together. The room was small, cold. Principal Thompson sat behind her wide oak desk, hands folded. Her eyes flicked from Celine to the boys and back again. "I've received serious complaints," she began, her voice clipped, "and I need to know exactly what happened on that bus." Jake leaned forward, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "She lost it, just attacked us. We didn't do anything." Trevor nodded like a bobblehead. "We were just sitting there. She went crazy." Kyle mumbled, "She blindsided us." Celine waited. When they stopped talking, she spoke. Calm, director, eyes level with Principal Thompson's. "They touched me, tried to drag me out of my seat. I defended myself." There was a beat of hesitation. Thompson shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. "Well, until we have all the facts, Celine, you'll be placed on temporary suspension." There it was, not a surprise, but it still burned. Jake smirked. Trevor's chest puffed. Celine stood. "This isn't over," she said softly. "Not even close." And as she walked out, Jake's smirk twitched again. But it wasn't victory he felt. It was fear. Because something had changed. And deep down, he knew. She wasn't the one being cornered anymore. Chapter 5. The setup. The news of the suspension spread faster than wildfire. By second period, whispers trailed through every hallway of Northwood High like smoke. Celine Carter attacked Jake Langston. She flipped them like in those wrestling videos. They didn't even touch her. Each version of the story twisted depending on who told it and who they wanted to protect. Celine sat in the back of the front office, waiting for her mother to arrive, her backpack at her feet, and her hands folded in her lap. The receptionist avoided her gaze. So did the vice principal, who passed by twice without a single word. She wasn't a student today. She was a problem waiting to be dealt with. Jake, meanwhile, had already gone home. For his safety, they said, a courtesy never offered to her. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Deshawn. She didn't need to open it to know what it said, but she did anyway. Deshawn, tell me everything. No holding back. She stared at the screen for a second longer, then typed 2 words. They lied. 2 miles away, Jake Langston sat in his father's home office. His left cheek still bore a light red mark, and his ego was far more bruised than his body. But his father wasn't concerned about that. He wasn't even asking if Jake was okay. He was on the phone, already, talking to someone on the school board. "Celine Carter," he said, pacing slowly, voice controlled and sharp. Aggressive, unstable, possibly violent outside of school as well. Jake sat quietly, eyes on the floor. He didn't dare interrupt. "You know the climate we're in," his father continued. "All it takes is one viral moment. We need to move fast, shape the story before the public does." Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. This part was already in motion. By the time Celine got home, the storm had arrived. Her mother's face was tight, her mouth a thin line. But she didn't yell. She just handed Celine the printed copy of the email the school had sent. Celine was involved in a physical altercation with 3 other students on the bus this morning. Due to the severity of the incident and pending a full investigation, she has been suspended for 5 school days. No mention of who started it. No mention of how many times she'd reported harassment, or how often it had been ignored. Celine sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper until the words blurred. "They're already trying to bury the truth," she said flatly. Her mother said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "Do you want to tell me what really happened?" Celine nodded. And she did. Everything. From the thrown wrappers to the taunts, the torn magazine, the water bottle, every insult, every moment she kept quiet until she couldn't anymore. And when she finished, there was a pause, a deep one. Then her mother exhaled. "Okay," she said, "then we fight back." That night, Celine sat on the floor of her room with her phone buzzing non-stop beside her. Screenshots from classmates, TikTok videos, blurry pictures of her standing in the aisle, Jake pointing like a cornered animal. Kyle Reed, 99. Crazy girl snapped out of nowhere. Northwood gossip. Is Celine Carter gonna get arrested or what? Truth bombs. Nah, y'all ain't seen the whole thing. She's been taking their crap for months. Some supported her, most didn't. But the worst part? The school hadn't said a word, not a clarification, not a correction. And that silence? It said everything. Celine stared at the screen until the images stopped moving. Then her door creaked open. It was Deshawn. He stepped inside, holding his phone, and a look that could break walls. "I've been making calls," he said. "Yeah?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "There are cameras on the buses. The footage is supposed to auto-upload to the district servers." Celine blinked. "You're serious?" "I am," he said. "And I've got someone on the inside." Celine's jaw tightened, a slow heat building beneath her ribs. They wanted to spin the story. They wanted to erase her. But they made a mistake. They forgot the camera was watching too. Chapter 6. The Fire Spreads. By sunrise the next morning, the lies had grown teeth. Screenshots of Jake's bruised ego were already circulating through group chats and school forums. Some kids were calling Celine a thug, others a hero. Most? They stayed silent, waiting to see where the wind would blow. But Celine Carter had already decided. She wasn't waiting anymore. Deshawn had barely slept. By the time Celine entered the kitchen, he already had 2 phones on the counter, a laptop open, and a notepad filled with names. His hoodie was rumpled, eyes bloodshot. But the fire in him was awake. "I talked to someone at the district office," he said, skipping hello. "The bus footage is real. Auto-uploaded to the transportation server every day." "Is it still there?" Celine asked. He nodded slowly. "For now. But I also heard Jake's dad has been calling people. Hard." Celine exhaled. Of course he had. Jake Langston's father didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He made quiet calls. Had private meetings. and people listened, because his last name opened doors that hers never would. "He's trying to get ahead of the footage," Deshawn said, "before anyone sees the truth." Celine leaned against the counter, her hands tight around a mug she hadn't yet touched. "Can we get to it first?" Deshawn's eyes lit with the same defiance she felt burning in her ribs. "Already working on it." By lunchtime, the whispers had become a storm. A blurry photo of Celine standing over Trevor had gone viral in the Northwood community. The caption, "Unhinged." But Deshawn moved faster. He sent out messages to student groups. He reached out to alumni, a cousin who worked at a local news station, a friend of a friend who handled online petitions, and by 3 p.m., a simple tweet changed everything. Celine stood up. "There's camera footage. Ask why they don't want you to see it." The post exploded. Retweets, DMs hashtags, comments from people who'd never met her but saw through the silence. "This girl's not crazy. She's been pushed too far. If there's video, we deserve to see it." How many times has the system protected the loudest liar? Coach Ramirez showed up that evening, unexpected but not unwelcome. He stepped into their living room like he'd been summoned by instinct alone. "I've seen enough of these stories," he said, voice low. "I've seen what happens when no one pushes back." Celine watched him carefully. "And?" He nodded. "I'm in." He sat with Deshawn for hours, digging into policy books, school board rules, social media threads. They mapped the fight like it was a match. And this time, Celine wasn't stepping onto the mat alone. That night, Celine lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She could still hear Jake's voice, the snap of the paper, the impact of her decisions. But now they were background noise, because something else was rising. The lie had legs, sure. But the truth? The truth had an army. And somewhere in the district office, a file with her name on it was sitting on a hard drive, waiting. She closed her eyes, exhaled slow, and let the weight settle. Tomorrow, they'd try to silence her. But tomorrow, she'd be louder. Chapter 7. The First Spark. It happened just after 10 a.m. Celine was pacing her bedroom, the carpet wearing thin beneath her bare feet, when Deshawn burst through the door. No knock, no warning. His phone was in one hand, eyes wide, voice breathless. "We got it!" Celine froze. "You're sure?" He nodded, shoving the screen toward her. A paused frame filled the display, grainy but unmistakable. Jake standing in the bus aisle, arm raised. Trevor behind him, grabbing for her backpack. Kyle charging from the side. And in the center, Celine, still, defensive, controlled. Then he hit play. The next 15 seconds changed everything. The footage showed them closing in on her first, hands reaching, her voice, sharp and clear. "Take your hand off me." Then it showed the rest, quick, precise. Not a flurry of rage, but trained movement, self-defense, nothing more. No one could deny what the camera had captured, not even the board, not even Jake's father. Celine stared at the screen as the clip looped again and again. It was her, it was real, and it was theirs now. By noon, Deshawn had already sent it out. A drop link to trusted students, a backup on a secured drive, a burner account ready to post if things got blocked. Coach Ramirez uploaded a copy to a local education watchdog site. He wrote the caption himself. "District claims under review." Here's what actually happened. It spread like fire. From inboxes to group chats, student pages to neighborhood forums. Within an hour, the footage hit TikTok. By 3 p.m., it was trending on Twitter under hashtag Selena didn't start it. By 6 p.m., 2 local reporters were outside their door. Jake's version of the story unraveled in real time. The image he had carefully crafted, that of the golden boy victimized by the aggressive girl on the bus, cracked, then collapsed. The comments flooded in. "This is disgusting. She was defending herself." So the district tried to bury this? How many other stories never made it to video? School officials went quiet. Emails went unanswered. Jake's father issued a vague statement. "We are aware of new developments and reviewing the matter internally." But it was too late. The footage was everywhere, unfiltered, undeniable. That night, Selene sat on the edge of her bed, knees drawn to her chest, scrolling through hundreds of comments. Some cruel, most not. Some supportive, some heartbreaking, but all of them saw her now. For the first time, she wasn't just a girl on the bus. She wasn't just a headline. She was a person, a fighter, a witness, and the world had watched what they did to her. Deshawn came in quietly this time. "They'll come harder now," he said. "Jake's dad won't take this line down." Selene looked up, her voice steady. "Then we hit back harder." Coach Ramirez called minutes later. "They've called an emergency board meeting for next week," he said. "It's not public yet, but I have people listening." Selene's jaw tightened. "So they know it's real." "They know," the coach said, "but knowing isn't the same as acting." There was a pause. Then Selene spoke. "Then let's make it impossible for them to ignore." Outside, the sky rumbled. Not thunder yet, but the kind of wind that whispered something bigger was coming. And Selene Carter? She was ready to meet the storm. Chapter 8, The Walls, Crack. By the time Monday rolled around, the walls of Northwood High were humming with tension. The footage had shattered the official narrative, and the administration had nothing to say. No press release, no apology, no acknowledgement. But the students weren't waiting anymore. That morning, dozens of them arrived wearing plain white t-shirts with 3 words written in bold black marker. "We saw it." In the cafeteria, in the gym, in classrooms where even teachers couldn't pretend anymore. Selene wasn't at school, still officially suspended, but her name was everywhere. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became plans, and plans turned into protest. By second period, 3 students staged a silent sit-in outside the principal's office. By fourth period, it was 30. No chants, no signs, just silence. A still, undeniable presence. Inside the district office, the pressure mounted. Emails flooded in. Parents, journalists, advocates, former students, alumni. The footage had done more than prove Selene's innocence. It had reminded the town of every moment they'd ever been told to keep quiet. And Jake Langston? Nowhere to be seen. He hadn't returned to school. Rumor had it he was taking time with family. His father had gone into full containment mode, calling in favors, scheduling private meetings with board members, and attempting to reframe the story. "They're trying to stall," Deshawn muttered, staring at his phone screen from the living room couch. "They're hoping it'll all die down." Selene didn't look up from the comments she was scrolling through. "It won't," he nodded. "Not if we keep the pressure." That afternoon, a clip aired on the local news, footage of the protest, students sitting outside the office, a reporter narrating the context, and then cut with a cold, shaky voice from the school's PR officer. "We take all incidents seriously and are reviewing matters thoroughly." Coach Ramirez nearly laughed when he heard it. "That's not a statement," he said. "That's a stall tactic wrapped in nothing." But it didn't matter, because the cracks were showing. That evening, an anonymous email leaked from a district employee landed in Coach Ramirez's inbox. It read, "They're scared." The footage destroyed their version. A few board members are privately furious. Some knew Jake's dad was trying to bury it. There's going to be a special hearing. It's not public yet, but it will be. They can't stop it now. Selene read the email 3 times, then turned to her brother. "Start planning." Deshawn was already 2 steps ahead. He picked up his phone, started making calls to students, organizers, teachers who had quietly messaged their support. By the time the sun set, a list of names had formed. People willing to show up, people willing to speak, people no longer afraid to stand beside her. Coach Ramirez stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "They'll try to intimidate you, call it disruptive, accuse you of escalating. Celine looked up from the planning sheet in front of her. They've already called me worse. He nodded slowly. And you still stood. I didn't come this far, she said quietly, just to bow now. Outside, rain hit the window in soft, steady taps. But inside the room, the momentum was no longer theirs. It was hers. And it was growing. Chapter 9. The People Gather. The official notice came at 7:46 a.m. Emergency session of the Northwood School Board scheduled for Thursday, 6 p.m. at district headquarters. Attendance limited to board members and invited representatives, not open to the public. The message was clear. They wanted this quiet, controlled, contained. But by noon, the opposite was already happening. Flyers spread through inboxes and group chats. Handwritten posters appeared taped to lockers and car windows. And outside Northwood High, a single line spray-painted in chalk on the sidewalk said, "Closed doors can't block the truth." Celine sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, listening to her brother pace the room. "They think if they shut the doors, we'll stop knocking," Deshawn said. "But they forgot. This time we brought a damn battering ram." She smirked. He wasn't wrong. Coach Ramirez had already secured a list of teachers who would speak up. Students were organizing a walkout for Thursday morning, and a local pastor had offered to open his church for a community gathering that evening, just blocks from the boardroom. "They're not ready," Celine said. "They should have been," Deshawn replied. Jake Langston hadn't returned to school. His father was still calling board members, still pulling strings, still trying to convince them this wasn't about power or privilege. It was about order. "He says this is mob pressure," Ramirez told them later that evening, "and the board should resist it." Celine didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She just stared out the window where the streetlights glowed in the dusk like beacons. "Let him call it whatever he wants," she said. "But the mob has eyes now." Thursday came fast. By 8 a.m., a third of the students had walked out. Teachers stood near the entrances, some with crossed arms, others with quiet nods of support. Celine stayed home. Not by choice, but because she wasn't allowed back. Pending final review. She watched from her living room window as cars lined the street. Watched as people gathered outside the school with signs that read, "We stand with Celine." Let the footage speak. No more silence. The phone rang nonstop. Journalists, organizers, even a civil rights attorney from 2 towns over offering guidance. But Celine ignored them all for a moment, standing at the center of the quiet chaos, just listening. Then she turned to Coach Ramirez. "You're sure they'll hear me?" He looked at her like a man who had trained champions. "They won't be able to ignore you." By the time the board meeting began, the street outside the district office was full. Not a few angry students, hundreds, parents, former students, teachers, local leaders, strangers. Some stood quietly, others led chants, but all had come for one reason: Celine Carter. Inside the boardroom, the walls seemed to shrink under the weight of the voices outside. The members sat stiffly in their chairs, their polished words trembling under the sound of a town that had stopped being quiet. The superintendent cleared his throat. "Let's proceed." A knock echoed at the back door, and when it opened, Celine stepped in. Not invited, not escorted, just there, tall, calm, unshaken. A quiet storm. Chapter 10. Facing the Board. The room fell silent as Celine Carter stepped through the doors. She didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. Every board member turned toward her like a ripple moving through still water. Some looked surprised, some annoyed. A few couldn't meet her eyes. Jake Langston's father, board member Langston, stared straight ahead, jaw locked, fingers pressed tightly together. His power was in the room, but so was his fear. Celine walked forward, flanked by Deshawn on one side and Coach Ramirez on the other. Her steps were steady, her breath even. Her voice, when it came, was low, but carried like thunder. "I know this wasn't meant to be public," she began. But the truth already is. The superintendent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miss Carter, this meeting is for internal... She cut him off. Calm. Sharp. Number, this meeting is about me, and I won't be spoken about like I'm not in the room. A few members straightened. Some blinked, caught off guard. Board President Gilman cleared his throat. We've reviewed the footage and statements. We're here to ensure every voice is heard. You heard the wrong ones first, Celine replied. You suspended me before you asked what happened. You let them lie. And then you tried to close the doors. The tension in the room thickened. Coach Ramirez stepped forward, handing over a printed copy of the official transcript from the leaked footage and student witness statements. These are the voices they ignored, he said. Until now. Deshawn added, and if you try to silence them again, we've got 50,000 more ready to echo them. One board member, Mrs. Everett, spoke softly, her eyes heavy. What do you want from us, Celine? Celine's gaze didn't waver. I don't want anything. I'm demanding what's mine. A full reversal of the suspension, a public apology, and safeguards so this doesn't happen again, not to me and not to the next girl who dares to speak. Another beat of silence. Then Gilman looked toward Langston. Jake's father leaned forward, voice clipped. You're letting social pressure dictate school policy. This sets a dangerous precedent. No, Celine said, eyes locked on him. You did that. When you tried to bury the truth. When you tried to bury me. The boardroom door opened again. Outside, the crowd had grown louder. The hum of chants filtered in. Justice for Celine. Show the footage. Truth over power. Ramirez looked each board member in the eye. You're not just making a decision about Celine. You're deciding whether this school serves its students or its politics. Gilman leaned back, hands folded tightly. We'll take a brief recess, he said. Celine stepped back, her hands still, her breath even, her eyes unwavering because she knew the truth was finally louder than the lie. Chapter 11. The Collapse. The board members filed out of the chamber like tired actors retreating backstage, their roles slipping beneath the weight of real consequences. Outside, the voices kept rising, chanting, singing, demanding. The sound pressed in through the walls, no longer ignorable. Celine sat in the front row now, flanked by Deshawn and Coach Ramirez, watching the empty chairs across the table with a calm that didn't come easy, but came honest. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When the board returned, their posture was different, sharper, more guarded, eyes flicking to one another like no one wanted to speak first. Board President Gilman cleared his throat. Again. We appreciate your patience, he said, hands folded like shields in front of him. And we acknowledge the intensity of the public response. Celine said nothing. She didn't need to. Gilman continued. We've reviewed the footage and the documentation provided by Mr. Ramirez and others. While the situation is complicated, Deshawn leaned forward. It's not. Gilman blinked. Coach Ramirez cut in. The only thing complicated is your desire to protect someone with a last name that sits on this board. That hit. A few board members flinched. One looked down. Gilman tried to hold composure. Regardless, it is clear that certain early conclusions were premature. Celine raised her chin slightly. So say it. Gilman looked at her, and the pressure cracked him. You acted in self-defense, he admitted. The suspension is rescinded, effective immediately. Gasps and murmurs echoed from just outside the open doors. Those gathered in the hallway were listening, recording, witnessing. Gilman went on. An official statement will be issued, apologizing for the misjudgment, and we will begin reviewing the school's reporting protocols moving forward. Celine didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just nodded once. The kind of nod that says, "That's the bare minimum, and you know it." Jake's father, silent until now, stood abruptly. His face had gone pale. His words came like cold steel. "This board is making a grave mistake." Gilman didn't look at him. Another member did. "No, Charles," she said softly. "The mistake was thinking no one would ever challenge you." As the meeting adjourned, Celine walked out through the front doors into the open night. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in something fiercer. Affirmation, solidarity, a chorus of voices raised not just for her, but for every student who had once been made to feel small. Celine raised a fist, not for drama, for truth. Deshawn beside her, Ramirez just behind, dozens pressing forward, then hundreds, and Jake Langston? Nowhere in sight, because power without truth can only last so long. Chapter 12. Justice Delivered. Jake Langston didn't show up to school the next day, or the one after that. Word spread fast. His father had pulled him from Northwood High. Temporary transfer, the official statement said, due to threats and safety concerns. But everyone knew the truth. He ran, because he no longer controlled the story. Celine walked through the front doors of the school Monday morning, surrounded by silence. Not the silence of fear, the old silence she'd lived with for months. This was new, the silence of recognition, of respect, of change. Eyes met hers instead of sliding past. Some nodded, some smiled, and some simply stepped aside. The once smirking boys in the hallway no longer dared to look her way. Trevor sat alone at lunch now, head down, tray untouched. Kyle had deactivated every account he once used to mock her. He rarely spoke in class, barely raised his hand, like even his voice knew it had lost the right to be loud. And the teachers? They watched more closely now. They listened when students spoke. And when Celine passed by, a few even whispered, "Good morning." It wasn't perfection, but it was a start. In the days that followed, the district released its statement publicly. They called it a serious oversight. They acknowledged failures in protocol. They used the word apology 3 times. But Celine didn't care about their phrasing. She had already rewritten the ending. The footage stayed online, permanent now, backed up across platforms, reshared whenever someone tried to rewrite history. Students who had once stayed silent began sharing their own stories. Teachers began organizing meetings on harassment reporting and student protection policies. And Mrs. Green, the middle school teacher who'd helped rally the protest, was invited to speak at the next board session. Her opening line? "Celine Carter reminded us of what happens when courage refuses to back down." Coach Ramirez caught up with Celine just outside the gym later that week. "You coming back to practice?" he asked, crossing his arms with that half-smile he saved for his best students. Celine paused. "Not yet." He nodded, understanding instantly. "You changed something," he said, "whether you meant to or not." She looked out across the field, where students were sitting in loose circles. Some wore her name on their wrists. Others carried books with fresh curiosity. The whole school felt different, subtle, but real. "I didn't do it for that," she replied. "I know," Ramirez said, "but that's what makes it matter." That night, Deshawn tossed a stack of printouts onto the kitchen table, messages from around the country, support, gratitude, stories from kids in small towns, from parents, from teachers, from strangers. "You see what you did?" he asked. Celine picked up one note and read it aloud. "I used to think staying quiet was safer. Not anymore. Thank you." She folded the paper carefully, then looked up. "We're not done," she said. Deshawn grinned. "That's my sister." Chapter 13. Return to the mat. The gym smelled the same. Floor wax, chalk, sweat. But as Celine stepped onto the mat again, something had changed. Not in the room, but in her. It wasn't just the way her shoes struck the floor. It was the weight she carried now, the silence she had turned into strength. She wasn't just Celine the wrestler. She was Celine the storm. Coach Ramirez stood by the sidelines, arms folded, watching her stretch with careful, focused eyes. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I've been ready," she said. "I was just waiting for the noise to clear." He nodded. "Good, because we've got regionals next month, and some of the same girls from last year. They're asking for you." Celine smiled slightly. "Let them ask." Word of her return traveled fast. That afternoon, students lined up against the bleachers just to watch practice. Not for spectacle, but for something else. For proof. That after everything they'd seen, after the lies, the silence, the fight, Celine Carter still stood. Strong, whole, unshaken. She pinned her first opponent in under 40 seconds. The second lasted a little longer. By the end of practice, no one had any questions. Celine was back. In the locker room, Celine sat alone for a moment, towel draped over her shoulders, sweat still drying on her skin. The ache in her arms felt good. Earned. Familiar. One of the younger girls, new to the team, barely 15, walked in hesitantly. "Hey," she said, fidgeting with the sleeve of her shirt. "Can I ask something?" Celine nodded. "Was it worth it? Everything you went through?" Celine didn't answer right away. She looked down at the mat burns on her hands, the fading bruise on her side from one of Trevor's last wild swings, the faint scar on her soul she knew she'd carry longer than any physical mark. Then she looked back up. "Yes," she said. "Because now, when someone like you gets cornered, this school knows better than to stay quiet." The girl nodded slowly and smiled. That evening, Celine stood outside the gym as the sun dipped behind the trees, golden light brushing her skin like a medal she didn't have to wear. Coach Ramirez joined her, arms crossed. "Next season," he said, "I think you should lead the team." Celine blinked. "Captain?" "No," he said. "Leader." There was a difference, and they both knew it. Across town, the Langstons' house was dark, their windows closed, their curtains drawn. Jake hadn't returned, and his father's reputation had gone from untouchable to uncomfortable. The whispers followed him now, the same way they once followed her. Celine didn't celebrate that. She didn't need to. The truth had done what it always does. It stayed. Chapter 14. Echoes of Change. Northwood High was not the same school it had been a month ago. The hallways still buzzed with chatter, bells still rang 5 minutes too loud, and lockers still slammed like gunshots during passing periods. But beneath the noise, something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. The students walked taller now. Teachers listened more closely, and the walls, once covered in silence, had begun to echo with accountability. It started with a meeting, organized by students, endorsed by staff, led by Celine Carter. In the library, folding chairs were arranged in a wide circle. At the center, a microphone, unplugged, symbolic. "No authority," Celine said. "No filters. Just truth." The Student Voices Forum met every Thursday. Stories poured out. A freshman girl spoke about being followed home. A senior boy admitted he'd been afraid to report a teammate who harassed him. A shy sophomore confessed that seeing Celine stand up changed how she saw herself. Celine never claimed credit. She just listened. And when it was her turn to speak, she did so with quiet strength. "I'm not brave because I wanted to be," she told them. "I'm brave because I ran out of other options." That hit harder than any quote on the wall. The administration watched carefully. Principal Thompson, once quiet in the background, now stepped into the forum space twice a month. She didn't speak the first few times, just observed. Then, slowly, she began asking questions. "What can we do better? And people answered. Mandatory staff training, anonymous reporting systems, clearer harassment policies. The board approved the first set of reforms within 2 weeks. And Celine? She watched it unfold like someone standing at the edge of a field that had finally started to bloom. One afternoon, Mrs. Green from the middle school paid a visit. She stopped Celine just outside the cafeteria. "You've become the person students whisper about when they need courage," she said. "You may not know it, but you're already leading." Celine nodded. "I'm not done," she replied. "Good," Mrs. Green said, "because neither are we." In late March, the state wrestling championships posted their final lineup. Celine's name sat at the top of the bracket. Not because of the story, not because of the headlines, because of her skill, her fight, her focus. The story followed her, but it no longer defined her. Jake Langston's name never returned to the morning announcements. His crew faded into memory like a storm that no longer threatened rain. The fear they once commanded had been replaced by something stronger. Awareness, voice, community, not perfect, but powerful. That night, Celine sat by the window in her room, the glow of streetlights brushing the side of her face. She scrolled through an email from a student council rep. "We're naming the new mentorship program after you. If that's okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with a quiet breath, she typed back, "It's not about my name. It's about what comes after it." Chapter 15. The Stand. The sun rose slowly over Northwood High, casting a soft gold across the courtyard. The air was cool, quiet, and still, just like the morning everything changed. But this time, there was no dread in Celine's chest, no weight in her steps, no fear waiting on a yellow school bus. This time she walked freely, and everyone saw her. She stepped onto the auditorium stage to the sound of quiet clapping, then louder. The gym was packed wall to wall. Students, parents, teachers, journalists, coaches, even board members. The school called it a celebration of student leadership. But everyone knew the truth. It was the day they finally said Celine Carter's name the right way. Coach Ramirez stood to the side, arms folded, a quiet pride behind his steady gaze. Deshawn filmed from the front row. Her mother sat beside Mrs. Green, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that had long since given up. The principal walked to the podium first. Her voice cracked slightly as she began. "What happened here will never be buried again." She stepped aside, and the room stood as Celine took the mic. She didn't have a speech, just her truth. "I'm not standing here today because I wanted to lead," she said. "I'm standing here because I didn't want to disappear." Eyes locked on her, phones held up. But she spoke like none of that mattered. For too long, students like me were told to stay quiet, that our silence would protect us, that not making trouble was safer. But the truth is, silence never saved anyone. She paused, let it sit. "I fought back because no one else did. I told the truth because no one else would. And I stood my ground, because someone had to." The auditorium fell completely silent. No coughing, no fidgeting, just breathless attention. "But I'm not the only one anymore," she added. "Now we all know. Now we all see." She stepped back from the mic, not with applause in mind, but with peace. The storm had passed, and she had not only survived it, she had become the lightning inside it. After the ceremony, students lined up to speak with her. Some thanked her, some simply nodded, a few cried. Celine stayed until the last one had spoken, until every quiet voice found its place. She no longer stood alone. Later that evening, she stood at the edge of the school steps where the yellow line of the bus lane faded into gravel. She stared out across the parking lot, remembering how it felt to sit by the window with a backpack strap gripped too tightly in her hand, how it felt to hold back, to endure, to choose silence over fire. But no more. That girl was still part of her, but no longer the whole story. because Celine Carter had not only defended herself, she'd changed a school, she'd ignited a movement, and she had made damn sure they would never forget her name again. The end.